I'm just joking. This is the Visiting Writers Series. And this is our final reading in the spring semester. And we welcome today two luminaries, Jordan Dunn and Rick Meier. Rick Meier, who I'll introduce first, and Jordan Dunn, who I'll introduce second, will both be introduced within the same introduction. Because, in fact, the structure of this reading is that they will, without warning, alternate between their readings. It won't be one of those one person goes first and the next one goes afterwards kind of things. It'll be one person goes first and then the next one goes afterwards, and then one person goes again and the next person goes after that, and so forth kind of readings, the kind that this auditorium might never have seen. It's true, I think, right? But Rick Meier might be known as the writer-in-residence visiting, whereas I am the visiting writer-in-residence. And it feels appropriate that the visiting writer-in-residence should introduce the writer-in-residence visiting here today. And there's one thing I would say about Rick Meier, and I don't know what it is. So I'll have to work towards it. Maybe it has something to do with a kind of writing that insists that it takes place inside of a lived life, rather than a writing that pretends that it's an object that might stand apart from lived life. And there is something in Rick's writing that makes this insistence exceptionally apparent in such a way that, as a reader of it, and as someone who writes with his writing, as I feel I do, I find that I must admit to myself that I am not a being within the unit of life as standing apart from lived life, but I am in fact a being living within a life unable to stand apart from it. And while I might entertain such pretenses of writing being a space which is somehow not exactly in living, I cannot sustain those pretenses while writing, especially while writing next to Rick's writing. Jordan Dunn, on the other hand, is really just visiting. And he's not a writer who doesn't reside, I would say, but he doesn't reside here. He resides in Des Moines, Iowa, which is some 372 miles southeast of here. Is that right? West, sorry, yes. I had the map. I was looking at the map rather than being in it. Yeah, to the left. Yeah, it's that way. Yeah, and Jordan actually grew up quite close to where Carthage College is for his teenage years, in the town of Antioch, Illinois. If there's one thing I would say about Jordan Dunn's writing, I don't know what it would be, but I'll say something else instead, which is that Jordan has, in his writing, produces an uncanny set of relations, I would say, between texts and the ways in which the thing that we call the natural world is constructed. And Jordan, as someone who is also living and moving through the world, is particularly interested in understanding the ways that I suppose a writing can be a writing. Writing a book is always the writing of a book that already exists. That is, the writing of a book is a writing into the idea of the book in some kind of way. And that also, in particular, a writing of a book about the natural world, right, is always participating within a system of, I suppose, a kind of categorical thinking about how nature itself is constructed. And this was a much more oblique kind of thing than I thought I would say about Jordan's writing. And perhaps I wish I could have rephrased it, but it's too late for that. And such is the way that Jordan's writing works, in which it has occurred down the pathways through which it occurs, right? And one finds already, having gone down those pathways, that those were the pathways one went down, right? And maybe this is a kind of nature that is proposed about the constructedness of Jordan's writing, which is far more oblique thing than I wish to say. But anyway, I would like to welcome both Rick Meier and Jordan Dunn here to the Visiting Writers Series. And maybe that is all.
Hello, welcome to the Visiting Writers Series. Okay. Lewis gave me this book, this blank book, and so I wrote in it 4/8/19. 4 throats in one voice, though earlier in a dream I said 4 throats and one voice. And now I am happy entering the stream of how the syntax joins what the dream divided. Horsetail clouds in tadpole shapes over Lake Monona. What is a place, Lewis asked, in Baxter's Hollow, at the end, beyond the end of Stone's Pocket Road, when Andy ate watercress from the nameless creek, hoping he wasn't too close to the root for liver flutes, and though he said liver flukes, it was the flutes we heard, while Jordan pulled a cancer root stem, a dark brown dead end of a living plant that doesn't photosynthesize to green. The cloud now is 2 faces joined by a cloud in a very direct syntax. Another face is the shadow of the crumpled pants below the raised knee on the folded sheets, a drapery of a face. The dance of choice and compulsion, a car passes and a train whistle sustains what the ink on the heavy pages shows the grain. The air here would love to trade you its coins for ours, will push on us doubling down. We'll probably do it as though we could trade our page for the world, as though we really could just sit down and type out the whole of that old journal tomorrow. Lewis Friedman, Anecdotes or Poems. And though I'm also multiple and a highway for presentations of people I treasure, the moments emotions arrived, even if too late to be aligned in the moments after in which the actor pretends it was all a dream, to sustain, to give sustenance for the fiction, the supreme fiction, that it all really happened as it did, and thus goes on doing. Trying alternates with this tympanum you ingested, counting footsteps or weeding propositions out until dirt, wrinkled puddle, daffodil, insect approaching with consideration, the operating platform for the week arriving today with real choices, junco, sundial, a turtle, or the world, or the oxeye joining them.
Does one clap between poets? Yeah, I think I'm asking you, Lewis.
One did just clap between poets.
I unfortunately need to use the podium, but it's full of screens and keyboards, so if you'll give me just a moment to reposition them. I'll tell you that just a few minutes ago, Lewis and Rick and I all ordered the same avocado toast on a plain bagel and enjoyed it together. And I don't know the last time I ate the same exact thing with 3 of my friends. There's something strange about the act of ordering, and I'm going to use that as a segue to begin this introduction. So I have some poems to read that I made from Thoreau's journals, and specifically they come from April 5th, 1854, and I prepared them for a reading I gave in Madison just this past April 5th. And I'm going to carry that day forward to April 9th and hope that you'll deal with the irregularity of it being April 9th, but my reading from April 5th. There was something important to me to read from the date, the calendar day that corresponded with Thoreau's journals in Madison. So hopefully we can take a step back to April 5th, which is also a way for me to stop rambling about the current date. Lewis asked that I give the introduction that I gave to these poems in Madison here again this afternoon. And it's a little bit difficult for me because in Madison I had been thinking about it on the drive over, and I have not thought about it since April 5th. And I believe the way I started it out then was by saying that I've been working with Thoreau's journals for about the past year. Is that how I started it out on Friday? I'm trying to find the same point of departure. That's where it will be, anyways. So, in working with Thoreau's journals, I wanted to not copy and paste text or to rewrite text the way that I normally would. Most of my writing is through source texts. But specifically, I wanted to take the text itself as a material out of the originals. So I'll show you what that looks like from a great distance. And I wanted to move the words around and not have them be anything more than an image. And there's something about working with words as images opposed to words as manipulatable text, which I'd never done before. And another poet who'd done that a fair amount is the poet Susan Howe, which maybe some of you are familiar with. And Susan Howe was also haunted by Thoreau in the same way that I am. And she wrote a book called Thoreau, or a part of a book, a poem sequence called Thoreau, which is Thorow. It's a play on words. And in her introduction, she talks a lot about the ways that Europeans colonized the nation that already existed here by changing names. And it's not something that we think about a lot, but if you change a name, you change your relationship to a place. And so, of course, everything here was already named when Europeans came here. But we decided that we needed to rename it all. And that in the act of naming, there's a great colonizing force. And I think Susan Howe in Thoreau is interested in the ways that Thoreau investigated Native American place names at a time when most people were interested in erasing any semblance that existed of them, because he felt that they were useful because they were original and because they also generally spoke to the things to a place's essence rather than a person that conquered or discovered a place. And so in her introduction to her poem, Thoreau, she writes, "In paternal colonial systems, a positivist efficiency appropriates primal indeterminacy," which is to say that a place name is something that's porous, that it should be able to change, or that we should be able to manipulate in some way as it relates to our current context. So today, our place name may have something to do with the humidity in this room versus the great coolness that's outside right now, which I'm sure some of you are thinking about. But for some reason, in Occidental tradition, we like to name things in a static way so that things don't change, or so that we try to push against the idea of change inside of a name. And the reason she titles it Thoreau is, in fact, because Thoreau changed his name when he was 20 years old. Up until that point, he was David Henry Thoreau, and then decided that from then on he would go as Henry David. And so I think that interplay between the way that Thoreau changed his name and the way that he was interested in Native American place names and the way that Susan Howe was interested in disrupting our normative senses of patriarchy inside of our country, I think that spoke to Susan Howe somewhat. And so I think that's why she titled this poem Thoreau. It actually doesn't have much to do with Henry David Thoreau. And she included 3 epigraphs to her poem that all have to do with Thoreau's name. And one of them speaks of the way a local farmer interpreted Thoreau changing his name, which was with quite a bit of scorn. Thoreau wasn't really interested in property rights or traditional ways of farming. And so he also did things like occasionally start a forest fire and burn down people's property. There's actually a pretty deep history of Thoreau destroying things. And I feel like that's not the time to go into this. So in 1878 in Concord lived Daniel Chester French, who's a sculptor. He sculpted Lincoln's Memorial in addition to a number of other famous American places. And his wife, Mary French, wrote a document about Concord during that period of time. And of course, Thoreau is dead by 1878, but Emerson and a lot of the other people around Concord were still alive. So, in a roundabout way, I'm going to read the section that Susan Howe includes, and then she stops, and then I'm going to keep reading the rest of the account, and then I'm going to read my poems. First, I'm going to take a sip of water, and I encourage everyone else to do so. Henry D. Thoreau, Henry D. Thoreau, jerking out the words with withering contempt. His name ain't no more Henry D. Thoreau than my name is Henry D. Thoreau, and everybody knows it, and he knows it. His name's David Henry, and ain't never been nothing but David Henry, and he knows that. Why, one morning when I went out in my field across there to the river, and there, beside that little old mud pond, was standing David Henry. And he wasn't doing nothing but just standing there, looking at that pond. And when I came back at noon, there he was, standing with his hands behind him, just looking down into that pond. And after dinner, when I come back again, if there wa'n't David standing there, just like as if he'd been there all day, gazing down into that pond. And I stopped and I looked at him and I says, David Henry, what are you doing? And he didn't turn his head and he didn't look at me. He kept on looking down at that pond. And he said, as if he was thinking about the stars and the heavens, Mr. Murray, I'm a-studying the habits of the bullfrog. And there that darned fool had been standing the livelong day a-studying the habits of the bullfrog. From the Journal of Henry D. Thoreau, April 5th, 1854. April 5th. Heard the croaking frog. See a speckled white-bellied butterfly. Also heard a small reddish one. Also heard a few stertorous sounds. Sail along the meadowside and over the wood. Sail over the henhawks, perhaps, with buff-edged wings. The me and the broadside and the meadoon, the meadowside by the roadside, a familiar twitter. I believe a specklewoods with my sounds from the butterfly, dark reddish ones, and pleasant weather brings them. April 5th. Over the house, swallows. Another day surveying at Hitchinson's, all a yesterday, looked up and saw them, see many hawks, many marsh hawks, and pleasant days. Here twinninlier twittering side, bellied swallowed side, I be a speckle, dry die. And also ninnular twitter right-bellied, small reddish ones, twitter twitter white-bellied swarl large butterfly, dark with buff-edged wings, many hawks out. Rode along dark with Buffy in the pleasant weather, rode and sprouts surveying along the meadows, a few frog by the roadside as we rode in the dry sprout lands. Looked up and saw the same white-bellied swallows. 1854, Butterflies and Frogs, page 185. Just so simple it may be, I am keeping the flocks of Admetus. I have taken off my out time and hung it on an outside, agreeable on my cheek. If it is, and how I see with the worn ahs, with the warm wee neek, as I would Hay's arm, Ha's arm. Arm the landscape, the disease on the hawks along the meadow, i.e. palistries, and at Greenlot, heard the hyla, see the landscape gain, warm wind on the cheek, surprised, am surprised too. April 5th, 1854. Highly, levery, leerly leaves. Leave notary, leery, loud, hard, and hard, hark, 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 shrill and shrill, hark, hark, and hark, and hark. While I was writing down that field note, the shrill, rill, peep, shrill, parrill, peep, to heart would hark. While I was writing down that field note, that is my luck. When I hear a known stertorous croak from some pool led with dry leaves. You may see anything, the buff-edged butterfly, and many hawks along the meadow. I was writing what field note the hylodes peep to me from, and it is truly these bring the marsh hawks every year. Surveying perhaps in the Elysian day, edged butterfly perhaps, for these bring out the marsh hawks every year. The zephyr is positively agreeable on my cheek when a soft or southwest wind blows. So, I will invite the writer in residence visiting back up. I'll also give you a little idea of how the structure is working, which is that we're each doing 3 pieces. And that was my first piece, also my long piece. Do you need something?
I don't.
Okay, please come up.
Jordan, should we clap with me right?
But then we don't have to clap again. Thank you, Jordan. So I want to thank you all for being here. It's lovely to read to people that I know and some people that I don't know. And I want to thank Louis for being more than me all year and inviting me to come back. It's been, I feel like part of the space that I've been writing in is the space that was made by me not being here and by Louis being here in my place. So I'm really grateful for that. I'm going to read, so I spent the 3 months of the summer in Italy, and the first 2 weeks I had 2 people with me, 2 dear people, and then they left, and then the next 6 weeks I didn't really talk to anybody. So that was an interesting period, and this is the first 2 weeks that I was alone and condensed down into a shape for today. And then in the last part, I'm going to read some fiction, and you'll hear some of these things come back into the fiction. It's been a year of thinking about what is fiction here and elsewhere. This is not fiction, if we can say that, or it's a different kind. I'm going to stand up here. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me if I stand here? I was feeling too far away. I wanted to come closer. Poetic awareness acts. Come with me, bird whistle, waves on pebbles, stop dance music, sun on terracotta tile reflected into face. An ancient woman smoking and gasping in the doorway of a workshop making plaster models of the statues and bas-reliefs of antiquity, the dust of which covered her smock, while her eyes, like the eyes of the repairer of horns, looked at something I couldn't see or perhaps understand as an object of observation, though I looked over my shoulder, and it might be that it was a pause that hovered in the air at which she looked, an opening vowel, many consonant sounds, well-trimmed delicacies, bright notes, antique paper mannequins, apples fallen from trees, the mildly waving ass, and how we felt having untold sensations made direct through relief untied all beliefs. A frog face, fish face in the clouds. Cree, 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 cree in the mouths of the swallows. In the paper pocket from the back of 2 old notebooks, I typed a lot of old notebooks during this time. In the paper pocket from the back of 2 old notebooks, found in the first a postcard painting of Henry IV, James sent me the year he played Gaunt, that begins, "So, here's my son." And in the next, a condom that expired a year ago last March. An anatomical drawing, I was thinking, a botanical or anatomical drawing is a kind of puppet. The blue and pink at my feet is a crab claw dried in the sun, an earlier stage of growth, It is also replacement and decay. Another crab leg is the same one further away because I moved deeper into the shade. Now what moves the stinging tide toward land turns me toward completion. Dizzy whelp, thy legs stand so high once perception takes in mice and single tears hold full scenes in mind. Thou takes it too low. The cloud sits on the mountain, sinking its butt into the stones just like me below this scraggly bush. On Saturday I see 7 boats, one so large it has another at the stern. Not having a boat, I am ashore. Oh, trickling water tickles the hand, sandpaper, astrolabe, your penknife, sickle all winch. When melted snow joined bottom and festy one morning like a king tying rings engraved, keep a point that tells the time. The heart absorbed in of dandelions, daisies, eglantine, thistle, aster, nasturtium, trillium, and now the pine needle inclines in sun. The new impulse is already swaying, cock-a-doodle-doo, fa-la-la, cree-cree, the first night, all the amps kaput, opened on return, all eyes, all pupils, all tingling skin, kept thinking the trouble had sweetened. This morning over the deep, clear hole in the sea, in the wonder of floating, a sudden fear of falling. There's 8 white napkins knotted by one corner to the balcony below ours. The lower opened ends drape and fold like cloaks on actors playing kings. Washing Day, the last Sunday of the spring. I began to note the day's moments of fear, however slight, the crushed snake in the road, boar hopping in the grass, spider in the knotweed near my face, scurry of lizards on concrete, the waving grass at the sea bottom, the sight or sound of people, asking, answering, hearing, ant with crumb in its mouth, hurts not suffered, boredom, all-consuming thoughts, memories diverting one's mind to the lingering late afternoon of being, not talking in one tongue or both, or music played at moments unexpectedly, 2 faces in one moment, leaving a crystal that told one's love down on the shore, and that fly bumping over and over against the screen wants to get out, I didn't need to kill it. Later, a tidal lability. I copied a sentence from The Castle this morning. If I'd come here by chance and not on purpose, he thought, I might fall into despair at this point. Savoring pine in the open palm and standing up, 2 hours awake, the keys still hang in the locked door. The asp also perceives the person upset and billowing. Then it rains, thunders, lightnings, the power is still out, so read Lady Chatterley over breakfast and cried at the double consciousness and its ending and return. Muscles flash, feet take the mountain way, and hands will follow. How useful some mistakes. Maybe one time grind each veil into a heap. Dove trills, roo-coo, an open boat enters the harbor, glides in, the man at the helm hops out and walks to the shore. Beside the vessel, the inside of the pine above the bench is brown and thick. It held me when I looked on my back through the book. And so writing in the notebook was connected apart from any mechanical connection. And if it was ridiculousness to picture writing in these acts, releases, being fucked or being fooled or being translated in between the daily meaning of the word and the symbolic meaning, or to let myself for a minute, a day, a week ago, go missing from the golden path, still it rang and was heard. Sweet tiptoes, sweet communication, so hard it is reading inside wideness. What was the fear? The shame of breaking the vibrating line between here and there by trying to download a movie or watch the World Cup. As each scene in a play holds the dense, warm, flexible life of all the rehearsals. And so the few days or hours in a novel include all the unmentioned repetitions. He stood in the shadow of the high seawall where the beach met the port and shook sand from each bag he'd laid out for inspection on the beach, fitting them together into a single dense bundle that towered over him as he set out to walk the beach again, moving slowly from the shadow into the sun. The mountain of woes placed on kings in alternate kingdoms and the moving dream shaking its hold after noticing are welded by intention. Radio lightning, strike, dynamo, polarity, underground wire, stretched cable, a heady day materialized, all the days heaving in hollow that loaded the kindred concentrations. Cricket tongue, new brain, dreaming person underwater, hearing a ray say someone never took its negation while the king upstages who. Strong thump and clack of oars as a boy rows one of the small white fishing boats past the balcony. It's the first I've seen without a motor. Basho tells the story of villagers pushing a rock said to have a face from its vantage deep into the woods where it lies hidden to keep visitors from walking through their fields to look, and pulling up all the plants that rubbed on the rock will transfer the image of the face to paper. Composure is perhaps a better translation of samadhi than concentration. It means stand with, to stand with the text, and be present for it as one is present for the other actors, the text a sentient being for whom I wish happiness and safety. The dead trunk of the tree, the dead part of the large olive trees and all trees, I thought, as I climbed the hill behind a flat an hour ago, isn't dead but inanimate and integral to the living form. A girl was yelling at her mother in the garden above the entrance to this road. The mother leaned on her hoe in the escarole. Water is stuck a little in my ear. An arm hair in the breeze has mosquito nature. At endings, delays move through the sky. Bye-bye, my eye. Don't count chicken feathers. Overcoat, over people. Boat, ocarina, concertina. A weak internal mush engine. The moon shines in big letters. Good hot time. After the red tip dot on tail, black and yellow butterfly on the rock, succulents along the shore path, heading down to drop the trash and shop, 2 white spots, became a seagull on the water when I took my reading glasses off. The Elici were there in groups inside the water, a red starfish that may have been another in a new place. I had 5 limbs, legs, arms, head, and the surface of the water rose and fell, and I curved with it. The parallax view moves the fishing boat, forward and back. A story. It was thus. The moonlight in the clouds had been the moonlight on the water. I was twice the size of the light blue car parked at the foot of the road to Polica. There were new fish in the sea, black and white as the beach stones, red and green, and the light through the tails of the ones with blue dots when the sun shone through were also new, spots of blue firing in the transparent tail fin, relating the story that falls through the hole. The neighbors' sheets were dripping from the railing to the courtyard. I will make my 6th and final trip with trash and recycling along the rocky shore later, a month of refuse. A man and a woman sitting back to back on the beach doing that, and the day before 2 old men pulling in the net on one of the open boats. One climbed in the chest-deep water and walked a different boat in a different time to its mooring. Only one world gyrates on one loom's bottom. His story that was more like Caliban's cry to dream again, than Stefano returning to the plot to kill the master and destroy his books. Yet the story repeats, my own invisible spirit whispering dissension in my ear. Old friend, I saw the snake and realized a fear of the snake being complete in itself, unbranched, undivided, the whole movement of a whole body, threatening to a body divided into parts. And the snake divided from its grasp was revealed as a companion. Jordan.
I think I'll follow Rick's lead, which if I had his confidence, maybe I would have done originally. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. This is too great of a distance, and it's a peculiar distance for poetry to try to embody. So I'm going to read this one poem here that spans these pages. Lewis asked me to make a chapbook for his class, and so this is the chapbook that I made. Maybe some of you have handled a copy of it. And I was interested in wanting this poem to be all one long column, because that's what it is. But I had to break it up into 4 columns. But putting it on a double-page spread was my way of hopefully giving a sense of continuity to it. This poem, as well as the three other poems, are called Tables of Alteration, and they involve a table that's at the end of some scholarly books where they note the handwritten alterations that an author makes to a manuscript, where the final published manuscript would include those alterations, but yet it's important for them to include a description of those alterations on their way to publication, and that's interesting to me. It also occurred to me that it has something to do with stuttering, which is a speech impediment which I had when I was younger and still have, but don't operate with as frequently. And what it involves are all of these brackets and then replacements for what should be inside the bracket with what comes afterward. And it occurred to me that when I was growing up, there's certain words that were very difficult for me to say. And I would pick different words, even though I wanted that one word. And something about this revisionary aspect in the Table of Alterations seemed to carry that forward for me. So, Table of Alteration 1. November frost, written in margin and marked for inserting. Shale outcrop, preceded by canceled stream, preceded by canceled dusky rill. Night hung upon the stream, interlined above along the terminal moraine. Night hung along the stream, their vines dividing to form a network near the margin. Honeysuckle, Tartarian interlined with the carrot. The carrot is the little mark that you would make for inserting something into a text. Interlined above canceled words. Honeysuckle, Tartarian, interlined with the carrot, pastured, pages, flow composition, followed by erased, springing, conscious, hardly conscious sentences, interlined above canceled words. My, interlined with a carrot, labyrinth, written vertically in margin and marked for inserting, dividing, divining look, swung swingly over our bodies. A network near the margin, opposite, followed by world, preceded by canceled poetry, saying bees, bays, self, written vertically in margin, fastidious wing or vein from out of the pond, undertook, seam, interlined with a seamed cecil, faint-hearted above canceled fainted heart, occasionally fed upon by the caterpillar, unicorn interlined with carrot, unicorn caterpillar along the path, peculiar shredded bark, exfoliated, written, underlined in pencil and traced with black ink, partial parted, settle down one does, point of origin, gooseberry prickles, and round the bend the self, followed by existing without one act of separation. Last night's dream interlined with the carrot, push off the float into the current. Sparrows persist, followed by inserted white-throated, red-bellied, red-headed, blue jay, burning bush, floodplain nettle, followed by stinging, springing, springdale flowed, followed by erased springing, loneliness, loveliness, never, interlined with the carrot, is floating happiness, fantastic, fantastical, me, my, trail, track, take forests, hoping, hopping, make forever. Written after finical and marked for transposing, my, followed by canceled being, gay feathered god, blazing star, ransacked, followed by canceled place. Chip, buzz, kinglet and cockleburr box elder mind, followed by Meier, and so splendorous the empty, golden crowned, microscopic features, uncancelled, rattling, interlined above shale plates, facility, written in margin, marked for inserting, Flabia oak, coral, pink marulius, passage to cosmos, fields, followed by cancelled the farm, trailing rivers, hemlocks, preceded by cancelled my undertakings hitherto. Life is short, though expressive, followed by transposed pomp. May I welcome Rick Meier.
So I've never done this before, which is to read fiction if this is what a fiction is. I'm a little nervous, but it's exciting for me. And I spent a lot of the year trying to figure out what it meant to write fiction for me, what it meant to be writing in a fiction. And the thing that I found very different, this operating within this world of writing. The thing that I found most different was that the way it happened was, rather than poetry, which for me in recent years has mostly been written is sort of the record of its moment of composition in some way. Fiction was like a thing that only happened by returning over and over, like something very, very slowly coming into focus. So it felt like it was always in the present, but one didn't know what had happened even as one was going back over the same text. It was like to sort of find out what had happened, was my sense of what fiction was, that fiction was the present in the writing. So I don't know if that makes much sense, but it made sense to me. And I will give you, as one does with fiction, this is probably about 175 pages into a novel, so I won't fill you in on much, but the character, and you'll hear some things from that other text might feel like they made their way into this text. The character Leopold is in Italy, and there's a woman, Frisia, who is from Germany but has an Italian husband and who lives in Italy, and they have met once, and then now they're meeting again at this festival where there are bonfires everywhere, and there's some people dressed in sort of goat-like costumes. And it begins with she is telling a story, and he is hoping she'll continue telling the story. So when he says not to stop her story, it's not the cat that he's referring to that has just appeared. That would seem like the antecedent of that pronoun, but Frisia, who was on the previous page, which is not here. By now the cat he'd seen earlier had returned, and Leopold pointed to it gently, not to stop her story, but to keep it going. He was a year younger than me, and I was new and from another country. I think he saw that I wasn't afraid of him, so he'd just wait for me to tell him what to do. I wanted to explore, and I'd tell him we were going to go exploring now, and he followed along. He agreed, but silently, I told myself. One place I liked to go was the thickets on the hill that led down to the Carnegie Library and the museum. Squirrel Hill, the whole neighborhood was called, and I'd never seen squirrels before, and most of them ran up into the trees where I couldn't follow, but I started to notice a few chose the thickets. We could go there, the boy and I. Once in the thickets, we found a little opening. The ground had been cleared and branches had been woven into one part of the thicket to keep it back. It made a room, the space of a room, and we sat down and talked about who lived there, when they'd left, when they were going to come back. We were inside there the way we weren't inside at school or at home. In the thicket, we didn't know who we were inside. I think the inside didn't belong to anyone, and so we were inside ourselves. We thought if it snowed, it would be warm, a cave. As we talked, the seasons seemed to be passing, even though we knew they weren't. That's what I thought, telling you about it now. I don't know what he thought. The strange thing about it was, and we spent months together this way, was he never seemed to be interested in me. I could never understand that. Leopold didn't know what to say. They seemed to be in the thicket the way she told the story, and he seemed to be the boy she'd led there. He was interested in her, but why didn't she know that? I'm interested, he said. I know you are, Frisia said, laughing. Most people are. She was on the edge, he thought. What she said was true, but it was also a self-delusion. She was laughing at it, but it was also true. She was deluded, but she knew it and was laughing. It reminds me of A Midsummer Night's Dream, Leopold said. When the rude mechanicals begin to rehearse their play in the woods and Peter Quince says, "Pat, Pat, and here's a marvelous convenient place for our rehearsal. This green plot shall be our stage, this hawthorn brake our tiring house. If you think I come hither as a lion, it were pity of my life," Frisia said. "No, I am no such thing. I am a man as other men are." Leopold wanted to continue, but he didn't have the next line, so he asked her, since he knew the play, what she thought of the lovers at the end, that 3 were freed of any spells but their natural inclinations, and one was still charmed. Did she think that could be a happy ending? Friesche laughed, but didn't say anything, pulling his arm and beginning to walk. Questions like that give me the creeps, she said after a moment. Leopold concentrated on walking. His whole consciousness seemed to go into the lifted foot, and so without that awareness, the one on the ground would wobble, and the arm Friesche was holding belonged to a recollection. As they turned up the incline under the house, the slight effort steadied him, and her hip bumped against his thigh. They crossed the second piazza, where the smaller barn fire was now burning, and entered the building where Leopold had heard the music and seen the musicians. Friesche didn't say anything, but led him up a narrow stair that opened 4 times onto tiny landings, before it ended inside a large room filled with people, a few of them in the hairy costumes of the revelers, standing or sitting on the floor, a few seated in wooden chairs. A banister blocked the opening to the stairs on 3 sides, and Leopold wanted to say it was like an opened cage, but didn't. The only other furniture was a long table cluttered with wine bottles and a heap of paper cups, a table lamp, and several burning candles. But Leopold also noticed paint cans and brushes and a screwdriver whose blade was thick with white paint. Another table lamp sat on the floor in a corner, and the light coming from below covered the eyes of the people standing above it in dark shadows cast by their cheekbones. The tuba player, a small man, stepped slowly onto his chair, still blowing his horn, and from there onto the table, knocking over a wine bottle. Leopold saw a man sitting on the floor catch it with a subtle opening of his hand, as if it were a trick he'd prepared, for which he received the applause of those around him by closing his eyes instead of nodding his head. Blowing a bass figure, the tuba player was squatting and rising to the beat, rocking the table and knocking over more bottles, mostly empty as far as Leopold could tell, rattling all of them. As the tune reached its climax, he lifted and draped one leg and then the other over the shoulders of the drummer, who had meanwhile been guided by someone's hand backwards to the table, where he lowered himself to receive the legs of the tuba player. The room was loud with talk, and only a few seemed to notice his elevation. Leopold felt transformed, but still everyone felt so far away he doubted he was really in the room. Even Friesche seemed to have shrunk, and he touched her right shoulder toward him to feel how substantial she was, and also indicating she should turn and look over her left. After a glance left, she turned right and faced Leopold. The drummer struck a beat, and the huge horn above him joined in. Someone is with you when they join you inside something, even if there's something else, and there always is another space. You look spellbound, but we're both here. That's why it was so confusing with the boy. Even when I brought him into the thicket or when we climbed the hill above the tunnel to see how the 2 sides were connected, he went with me, but we were never inside the same state space, not the same Zustandraum. I think he's going to fall, Leopold said. The drummer's legs were shaking, and he dipped and straightened, losing a little height with each repetition, pounding his drum all the while. Friesche laughed. It's part of the act. See how all the movements follow the music, even you shifting from one foot to the other, like you were trying to remember how to dance or maybe how to stand still? Leopold smiled, but he did feel unsteady. He remembered the wine he'd spilled on the white carpet at the party where they'd talked about this place and the Eleatic philosophers. He was glad he didn't have a drink. Before I came here, I learned a little bit about Zeno and the Eleatic school. My favorite part was about Diogenes, how he proved Zeno wrong by walking up and down a few times across the room. Then now it's time to play Oscondino, Friesche said, slipping into the crowd as she said it, hide and seek. Leopold saw her poke the drummer in the back before pulling off one of the tuba player's shoes and tossing it in the bell of his horn. And as soon as Leopold looked back from the disappearing shoe, he couldn't see her, or maybe couldn't tell in the crowd which was she. Emotion transferred from one day to another, or place, or person, is also transformed from one to another, Leopold was thinking, recalling a reading some months before of A.B. Warburg's introduction to the Mnemosyne Atlas, at the same time that he found himself setting off after her, floating through the crowded room, starting almost to stop each time he rounded the hairy white shoulder of one of the costumed and found the face not to be hers. Calling to mind the children he'd seen being passed hand to hand, and his own confusion when the woman he'd watched trying on coats had become his mother, which each strange face here confirmed she must not entirely have been. Finally, he bumped against the banister where they'd entered the room, putting the experience behind him, happy to be descending and intent on completing the game and finding Freesia, whom he was certain he would, as it seemed to him those were the rules of the game, not one possible outcome. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
I'm interested in that you stopped on the words possible outcome. Okay, so this is the last piece, and then we're going to do something that involves everyone's cell phones, but that'll be very short, but loud. So I need a place to put these pages, and I'm just reading little segments from them, and I think maybe what I'll do is I'll just sort of pass them out as I move through them, and people can pass them around, and that commotion won't really bother me. So if you don't want to look at them, then you don't need to. But it would be nice maybe if you helped move them about the room instead of just collecting all of them in front of you and not looking at them. So this is from a manuscript that's becoming a book called Physical Geography is Modified by Human Action, which is the name of a book by George Perkins Marsh that was published in middle of the 19th century. Everything is here as it happens because we are wedded to the afterglow of names. I want to be sure you can hear me before another epic passes our feelings by, distilling the perch on poplar for crow. We may now return cheerfully to the swift and subtle generosities provided by swallows this time of year, like iridescent color streams above the pond's transparent body. Tuning affect as a kingfisher dips and then rises. Summer undresses tailored containers as loon actuates loon in separation, while a large pine sways in actual nature. Eco-touring the white pine, diameter at breast height, 3.2 feet. Bats drink on the wing like swallows by sipping the surface as they play over pools and streams, their action on light in a region of clouds and phosphorescence, the rainbow iris and dewdrops and the fog images of rain, distribution of vapor and the color lines of equal variation, the observation of common names below an atmosphere of maples. Lily is to buckthorn, is to egret, is to cottonwood, is to coot and cumulus. Lily is to lily, is to egret, is to lily, is to coot and cumulus, is to coot and cottonwood. From the water of Lily's sightline, what makes a place my place? An endurance in the name event correlates my terminus to your terminus. Deadwood under pines. We break apart limb to limb and flame to flame with beauty, supplying nuance and pleasure to the white noise within me, which gathers together its shifting harmonies and bundles them with soft nourishment in our combinations of becoming, like new forms of blossom. The earth was cleared for the love of prosperous light. A firestorm is created as a result of a stack effect as the heat of the original fire draws in more and more of the surrounding air. To escape the blaze, many residents took refuge with livestock and wildlife in the river, in a little ravine or furrow washed out by heavy rain. An arrowhead of quartz, a pocket of bracken, our way through it, soaked to the waist, cautious on hidden snags below dripping fronds. An empty kind of beauty envelops the savanna, where field sparrows germinate outlines along time whistles, down whistles, trills, trills, depends on this placeholder, 2 p.m., places hold, depends on this leaf in my book, like habitat, abandoned or weedy in overgrown fields and pastures, woodland edges and clearings, extensive shrubby riparian areas in young conifer plantations, chorus frogs, eastern redbuds, raptures, and demonstrations of second growth language, pink to reddish purple flowers and the inhalation of the immaterial essence before the violence of summer storms. Box elders, thrushes, placement in the fact of things. Do not bring your noise of mind beneath this yellow birch. 3 piles of soil for the boy who plays with red spades and buckets and firelight. Senses of self if loons wail. Ricochet fear subsides, hidden beneath mortality. Hidden like mortality beneath toothwort and May-apples. Once the box elders prime spring with leaf out, the hermit thrush may for a moment perch upon dryad saddle. Discover, as a word does, what we do with names from vantage points together. To erase landscapes, to renovate fertility, to develop the two of us in focus, paddling a canoe for leisure along the body of a redistributed marsh. Tell me the fact bores into impression. As our lives fall into one another, the planted lotus opens up into another impossible day. And if we were anything less than lonesome points in space, we may be continually cheered by a more normal and natural society, and come to know that we are never alone. We are like sedges or other noticeable plants that are as clean and bright as the element from which they rise. On evenings like this one, there is no stir to ripple the pond's flat surface other than the wake of our bodies as we wade into the description of water. In the same way the forest, which nestled the pond, was once cleared for the love of progress, a remarkable destiny will follow us beneath the water's surface. That one looks like that. So that's, is that the full set?
That's the whole
Okay.
set. One encore.
Yeah, we have a
Chorus.
an encore chorus. So everyone can take out their phones and unsilence them if it pleases them. I'm just going to take a photograph because my kids always ask what it means to give a poetry reading. That's what happens there. Okay. So, if you open up a web browser of your choice, and if you go to Oxeye Press, OXEYE, press.org, or if you just Google it, it should be the top hit. Are people with me more or less? No rush. It might be that my phone won't work in this building, so I'll just have to explain to you what to do. Okay, if you go to the menu, there should be a heading called Chorus. Does that exist? Yes. If you go there, to the very top should be a chorus for April 9th, 2019, Carthage College. Okay. So everyone can start it, and it's okay if we're at different times. Hold on. There's more, isn't there? There's
That is-
continuing events,
that
and we're
is-
going to
that
do
is
something
the
else right
end.
now. Yeah. Well, that's the end of the reading. But there's more, right?
But more is going to be in other
Yeah.
books.
But you're going to do
I'll
that.
explain.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Rick. That was amazing. Things that will happen still are everyone who desires to join us is invited to come to a room around the corner, room 170, over there and to the left on the same floor. And there will be pizza served. And then Rick and Jordan will lead us in a discussion from about 7:30 onwards. And I will say, while this is the last visiting writers event of the season, we will have another literary event on May the 14th at this very hour at 6 p.m. in the Place of Woe in the Todd Weir Center. The participants of English 4300, known commonly as the Chapbook Seminar, will read to us from the works that they have been writing this semester. And we will have a really nice time, and you're all invited. Even you, Chuck and Kathy. You can come back too. It'll be fun. And yeah, it is such a pleasure for me to hear Jordan and Rick read. Thank you both for your amazing language and attention. So appreciated. Yeah, and thank all of you for being here. Yeah.